Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So, and a happy Ekadashi to everyone. I'm very, very pleased to be here again to continue our series where we are listening and exploring and relishing how Srila Prabhupada demonstrated in such a perfect way the 26 qualities of a devotee. And we're doing this through the eyes of his disciples as captured by my very dear friend, Siddhanta Prabhu. So welcome, Siddhanta. Thank you again for coming on. This is the second of our Ekadashi series. We have 24 more after this to go. And so we'll be doing a series every Ekadashi. We'll be exploring these qualities of the Vaishnavas. I noted in your memories series, and by the way, to our audience, this is kind of a taster also, because how many? You just released number 84, I think, isn't it?
Well, actually, I've produced 89.
89.
But I don't put the latest ones on the YouTube in deference to the devotees that are subscribing to the series. It wouldn't be fair to put it out free because they do donate to the program. So, and anyone who wants to donate to the series, by all means,
that's an open invitation. Right. But I have noted that practically every one of these series concludes with a question that you give to the speaker. Tell us about the quality of Srila Prabhupada that really stands out, and I've been really relishing how different devotees and they almost everyone says, well, there's so many, and how do I pick out? But there's still these. Srila Prabhupada touched everyone in a very unique way. It's another special part.
Yeah, it makes it more personal. You know, Prabhupada touched everyone's heart, no doubt about it. And by these devotees that I've interviewed, they actually go back in time, and their memory goes back to such a degree that the emotion that they were feeling then is exhibited within their heart as I'm interviewing them. There's no doubt about it that Prabhupada is coming to life through these memories that they invoke about Prabhupada and his qualities. And not only the learning lessons, but then I try to finish up with the quality that affected them the most about Srila Prabhupada. Generally speaking, you know, if I was to count them all, generally the quality that affected everyone the most or stood out for everyone, or the majority of devotees, was compassion. Although we are going to touch on, hopefully, examples of all the 26 qualities of
all
Prabhupada
of them,
contained and are manifested, being a perfect gentleman, which is a definition of a Vaishnava. Today we're going to explore the second quality, as noted by Krishnadas Kaviraj, that Prabhupada references from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And today we're going to focus on stories that reflect how Prabhupada does not make anyone his enemy. This is the second of the 26 qualities that we will discuss over the year. So if it's okay with you, we can start.
Let's get going.
I have the first devotee. This is from Gopal Krishna Goswami, who everyone knows, I'm sure. And if not, you'll see him and understand who he is and the story that he tells us. And then after the story is complete, we can come back ourselves online discuss any things that realizations ourselves from his story.
Wonderful. Okay. Hare Krishna.
In June 68, we had gone to a high school engagement in a Christian school. It was a school for girls, and there were many nuns in the school. And this program was arranged by a French-Canadian devotee called Janardhan Prabhu. He was doing his PhD at that time. So Prabhupada gave the lecture, and as usual after Prabhupada's lecture, he would say, "Any questions?" The same Mr. Mukherjee, who had told me that Prabhupada was a different type of saint, got up from his chair and started attacking Prabhupada. He started saying, "Why do you have to come and preach this philosophy in these Christian countries? They have their own philosophy. You don't need to do this." Devotees were very upset in the way he was being attacked. Prabhupada was not being criticized by the Christian nuns. He was being criticized by one of the people who came in his entourage. So devotees were very upset, and Prabhupada was very cool. In August, Prabhupada was leaving Montreal to go to America. And he told me, "Gopal, go and call that Mr. Mukherjee." I said, "Prabhupada, he insulted you so badly. Why do you want to see him?" And Prabhupada said, "I must have done something to him in my last life for which he took revenge." So Prabhupada, I called this gentleman, and Prabhupada blessed him before leaving. So from this we can see how magnanimous and merciful Prabhupada was. And even though this man had humiliated Prabhupada, he really attacked Prabhupada very badly. Prabhupada tolerated it, did not utter one word, and in fact he blessed him before leaving. So I think from this example we should draw inspiration and not retaliate the moment somebody criticizes us. We have to learn to practice Siddhanta Sunicena.
Hare Krishna. That's perfect. That was
Great
just
story,
perfect. I mean, and it just this quality that we're talking about, how Srila Prabhupada didn't see anyone, he saw everyone as spirit, soul, and he never took this as a personal affront, and now he's going to, that person is in my bad books or something like that.
Yes.
That was really nice.
But also, a lot of these qualities, they kind of merge. Some of them are similar.
Yeah.
Okay, now does this fit the magnanimous quality?
Right.
Which is an adjective that Gopal Krishna Goswami mentioned,
Yeah.
But I think this one really fit because as we, as conditioned souls and not the pure, we're trying to be a Vaishnava. Okay, Prabhupada said that several times. You're not a Vaishnava, you're trying to be a Vaishnava. So in trying to be a Vaishnava, sometimes if someone criticizes us or calls us names, we want to retaliate and we want to, then immediately that person has become our enemy. We can even see it in today's politics, with the COVID thing and the politics of in America. We've got a previous leader that, there's still some conflict, even amongst devotees. And I see it in myself, well, he doesn't like my position, so I'm going to, or that only goes so far. We're devotees, so I mean that overrides everything.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But I think this is a prime example of Prabhupada's magnanimous nature, but at the same time, not creating an enemy out of someone we would have thought, as Gopal Krishna and the other devotees there in the entourage were upset and angry with him that he was criticizing Prabhupada.
And Gopal Krishna Maharaj concludes by saying, "There's a lesson for us here."
Exactly.
That's part of this whole series of the lessons that Srila Prabhupada teaches us, not just by his words, but also by his example.
So always seeing things in a transcendental way to help us overcome the modes of ignorance and passion.
Great. Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from a devotee named Pushta Krishna, who's sadly no longer with us,
Yes.
but was intimate and very close associate of Prabhupada, and was a sannyasi at one point for many years. This is another story that will reveal how Prabhupada would not make an enemy of anyone. So let's hear from Pushta Krishna.
So we were flying from Mauritius to Durban, and it was a Qantas airline that was coming from Perth, Australia, and there was some type of a rugby match that had taken place with the South African and New Zealand teams at that time, and there were a lot of rugby types on the plane, and we had a seat in the non-smoking section, and I was seated beside Srila Prabhupada, and there I was with my little British hat and shirt and coat and pants, and people were smoking in the non-smoking section, and of course I was disturbed by it because I didn't like it, but I was also concerned for Srila Prabhupada's welfare, and so I asked one of the stewardesses, could you please ask them to not smoke? This is the no smoking section. So she informed the rugby type guys who were drinking quite a bit as well to stop smoking, and of course they didn't stop smoking. So I again went to inform the stewardess, can you please ask them again? And Prabhupada stopped me. He said, what is the difference between us and them if we can't tolerate these sort of things? He said, don't be an ordinary, common, foolish man.
Yeah. Yeah. So this brings out how the ability to tolerate is connected to the quality of not seeing anyone as an enemy.
Yeah, for one who is not a Vaishnava, a perfect gentleman, that anger will arise in our heart and want to fight. And, we think we're being wronged, by them not doing something that we feel they shouldn't be doing, in this case, smoking. But Prabhupada is the Acharya. Even in these simple circumstances in life, he's showing us how to behave. So for me, when I feel that urge in my heart to want to, criticize or tell somebody they're not doing something right, then I can reflect on this story with Prabhupada on the plane and the rugby players and how we should not become an ordinary common man.
Okay, let's aspire.
Yeah. So hopefully everyone.
And that's that right. I mean, that was we started this series where you related how Srila Prabhupada replied, "How can you tell someone is a devotee that they're a perfect gentleman?"
Correct.
So we aspire for that.
Right. And in the same vein, not creating an enemy, let's hear from Manjari Devi Dasi, who gives a short story that is very exemplary of how we need to behave.
And then Prabhupada came again in 1976, and by that time we had a few more devotees. There was just many things happened, but there was this one time when it was summertime. Actually, Prabhupada was there for Lord Balaram's appearance day, and around that time, and it was very hot in Iran, and it was also very. All the flowers were blooming, and it was a very nice atmosphere. Hare Krishna. And so Prabhupada at one point, he called it Bhuswarga, it was heaven on earth. He liked it very much. And one night, he would go out on the balcony, and he would sit and the devotees would sit out with him, or when we had guests, the guests would sit with him. And one night he was out there, and in Iran, it's a Muslim country, it's a Shiite country, so they have what's called namaz, which is prayers, a call to prayer 3 times a day, actually at Gayatri times. So, but they have over the loudspeakers a kind of a chant that's calling everybody to prayer. It's very beautiful. And so Prabhupada was sitting on the balcony, and this namaz was going on. And he listened to it, and then he turned to Atreya and he asked, what is this? Atreya said, this is namaz, and it's the Muslim call to pray to God. And they're saying the names of God, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, different, in the name of God who's the most merciful, most compassionate, things like that. And so Prabhupada said, that's very good, are calling everyone to prayer. And Atreya said, but Prabhupada, isn't it better that that we pray in the names of Krishna rather than Allah? And Prabhupada turned to him and he said, you're asking me to be sectarian.
That's very, very sweet. I mean, that is one of the, because when you talk about enemies in contemporary society, then very often the enmity is between people of different religions.
Exactly.
And sectarianism is kind of the root of so much enmity in our world today.
Yeah, it created many wars.
Yeah, wars.
Many deaths over that concept.
Yeah.
Great. So we have 3 more. The next one is from Vasughosh Prabhu. And tells another example of proper behavior in another circumstance that he will then describe, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Okay.
So let's hear from Vasughosh.
In December of 1976, Prabhupada traveled from Hyderabad to Wardha, which is 2 hours southwest of Nagpur in central India. And Mohandas Karamchand Mahatma Gandhi had his ashram there called Sevashram. Giriraj Maharaj, at the time brahmachari, had made friends with Ramakrishna Bajaj, whose father, Jamnalal Bajaj, was a big supporter of Gandhi and who had given this house in this place. It was a business family. So they're a wealthy business family. There was an Acharya's conference called by a surviving associate of Gandhi who was very famous all over India, Vinoba Bhave, who lived there. He was in his 80s at the time. Prabhupada was 80, 81, 80. And Swami Chidananda of the Divine Life, Swami Shivananda's Divine Life Society, was also there. During that 2-day program, Prabhupada went on a morning walk with his disciples, and there were like 25, 30 devotees. It was a good group for the middle of India at that time. Jayapataka Maharaj was there, Giriraj, lots of others. Anyway, as we started walking, I said, Srila Prabhupada, Mahatma Gandhi. And before I could say anything else, he cut me off. Do not criticize Gandhi here. This is his place. They won't understand. And then he changed the subject and, we didn't talk. So the lesson was that, you should be careful what you say depending on where you are.
Very interesting one to select. Because it shows 2 sides. It shows the side of, all right, we have to be, we don't want to make anyone our enemy by criticizing and so on. And at the same time, we do have differences. we do have differences of opinion, differences of perspective with other people that put us at odds in a certain way, but still maintaining that attitude of respect. And yeah, that was an interesting selection you made there. That one will be a one for some discussion. Where are we on all of this?
Well, we can further analyze it by saying or understanding that Prabhupada would be able to say something like that within the family amongst his disciples.
Yeah.
But the lesson was that I got from it was that we don't criticize when we're amongst others who may not hold that same understanding, that hold Gandhi in a higher position.
And that would then result in them becoming our enemies.
Exactly.
So you don't, because we don't want, I mean, it's interesting. He does not make anyone his enemy. It's not only that he doesn't see somebody as his enemy, but he doesn't make somebody else to become the enemy of him or her by expressing views and so on that person can't digest and can't tolerate, right. and will just, even though it may be, a fact. Gandhi shows up I mean, I don't know if that story is related, but we have incidences in Mumbai around Gandhi and his statue and discussions and so on. Bhagavad, I think, relates a very, very interesting tale about how in different relationship, different ways that Srila Prabhupada related to Gandhi. Sometimes in a critical way, and sometimes in a very honoring way. So
time and circumstance.
Yeah, good.
Great. Okay, two more. The one's a short one that we'll have, and then Jayapataka Swami will finish up our discussion tonight.
Oh, nice.
So Kaushalya, very early disciple. She joined very early. Was with Prabhupada in Surat. So many circumstances. She's also a great Vaishnava. So let's hear what she has to say about that Prabhupada does not create anyone his enemy.
We went to one engagement, and I can't recall exactly where it was, but it was a big, huge feast that this lady had prepared for us. And there were onions all throughout the vegetables. And I mean, it was delicious. It was vegetarian, but there was onions. So one of the devotees, I think it was one of the men, I can't remember which one, leaned over to Prabhupada and said, "Prabhupada, there's onions in the vegetables." He whispers it. Prabhupada looked at him like he was, his eyes were on fire. He was so angry. He said, "Quiet, eat." He didn't want to offend her. He was very sweet. He said, "It doesn't matter, just eat." And then another time, they were serving us chocolate, and we all thought, "Oh, you're not supposed to eat chocolate because it's got caffeine in it." And Prabhupada said, "Eat it." He was like he said, "Just eat it. You can have ice cream, it doesn't matter." So he was casual in some ways and strict in other ways, but I think that his principle was he didn't want to offend our hosts more than being a stickler for the rules and regulations. And that was more of a concern to him, I think, than the fact that there was onions in the vegetables. He didn't care. And he ate it and complimented her on her cooking. So it was a great example.
This is wonderful, that kindness, because the element of not making anyone your enemy is also driven by kindness.
Being a perfect gentleman.
Being a perfect gentleman, yes.
That's a Vaishnava. That was a higher principle than the restriction of not eating onions in this case.
Yeah. She's doing service. She's, honoring a pure devotee, and to then turn around and say, "Oh, what kind of cook are you?"
Yeah, don't you know the rule that Krishna doesn't like onions?
Don't you know?
It would turn her off immediately.
Completely. And then the whole, the whole purpose of bringing people closer. I mean because that's that's the overriding principle, that how to please Krishna, and Krishna is pleased when people serve the devotees.
Right.
Yes.
So let's finish with Jayapataka Swami. It's a little,
Okay.
it's a 10-minute story, but it's a great learning lesson that we'll talk about on the other side.
Okay.
Well, Srila Prabhupada told us that Late Prasad Thakur, who was the brother of his spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, became strained at a certain time. And they parted ways. Otherwise, for a while they were together. So Srila Prabhupada made a courtesy call to see him. I had been sent to go there ahead of time to find out the situation with Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, because he was living in a place called Dwadasa Mandira at Birnagar. And this is called Dwadasa Mandira because there's 12 like Shiva temples, all very little, small, beautiful little temples lined up in a row. And that is where you get the Dwadasa Mandira. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur spent a good section of his childhood there. There's a tree under which, mango tree under which he was seated. And it's a very beautiful place. And so we went to see, so I had initially talked with Lalit Prasad Thakur, and he was agreeable that ISKCON could do something. So then Prabhupada went there and discussed it with him. And it looked like they were going to give us, he had a big, I don't know exactly what the acreage is. Maybe it's like 25 acres of land, and maybe they would give us about half of it, where we could have a temple and do something for Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, which was on the side of a little pukur, a little water reservoir. And but the actual birthplace was a small little temple, which the door was broken off and it was in ill repair. And Prabhupada was practically crying when he saw that. So initially it seemed that things were working out. And then Prabhupada went a second time to kind of finalize everything. And Lalit Thakur, he's a very pure soul. He was like 97 years old at that time, if not 98. I think he lived to be 101, 102. And he would chant all the day. He'd just be chanting nonstop. There were deities upstairs on the second floor, and he had a library of all kinds of Bhaktivinoda Thakur books. And he had some disciples. It seemed one of his more intimate disciples was a very elderly lady, maybe in her 60s or 70s, who was called Bhakti Ma. And it was very impressive to see someone from a whole other era, like a century ago, you know. And he explained his own history, that he was a lifelong brahmachari, never married. He was working for the government till he was maybe in his 50s. As I forget what was the employment, something more like a clerical, white-collar thing with the government. And then he retired. And so now he was, but even throughout his life, he was doing sadhana bhakti. So it was nice to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had more than one child that was active. And he actually had a lot of disciples. He was doing the Namhata preaching in Bangladesh and different parts of Bengal. But it was in a particular area. There was some disciple called Sachinanda, or Sachinanda, I think, who was actively preaching in the villages. This was kind of the backdrop. And then he was sitting in this little room on his bed, and he didn't move at this age. He didn't move much. Even he was bathed in his bed. I think he went to the bathroom in his bed, and they would brag that even though he would go to the toilet there, it smelled like roses, which is not the normal.
You experienced that?
I experienced that smell. There was no bad smell in the room. I can't say firsthand,
Yeah.
But of course, with every person like that, they're surrounded by different people. And I think that his initial inclination was, as he had agreed with Prabhupada to do something jointly, but some of his followers had insisted that shouldn't give it. That's the impression I got. And the second time when Prabhupada went there, we were driving on the way to Calcutta and or Mayapur. It's about an hour drive from Mayapur. Then Prabhupada was given a seat, and he was discussing about developing the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But this time there was a different mood, and it was indicated that they weren't agreeable now to giving a portion or to have an agreement with ISKCON. And it was obviously they didn't have the capacity. They do some village preaching. They were enthusiastic in his presence to do some things, but it wasn't. They didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the Prabhupada became very impatient. He became very upset that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was so great that he deserves to have really such a wonderful facility, a wonderful monument for his greatness. And Prabhupada had talked about a library, a display, an exhibition, an ashram, a preaching facility, and fixed up his birthplace temple. But everything was being canceled with no reason given. Okay, if they could do it was one thing. So then Prabhupada, he suddenly became very intense in a very loud voice. He was saying, isn't it sinful? Isn't it sinful if somebody can develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but you're not allowing? Or was it the opposite? Isn't it sinful that you cannot do it? That somebody cannot develop, that if somebody cannot develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and they won't let anyone else who could develop do it, then isn't that sinful? I think that was quite a few years now. Because it was, so the question was, they had it, but they couldn't do it. We could do it, but they didn't want to let us. So then nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay status quo. It's going to stay in an undeveloped state. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, still to this day, is worse run down than what it was then. And Prabhupada repeated this about 4 or 5 times, very loudly, almost, I wouldn't say shouting, but I would say just maybe one level below that. Very intensely, loudly declaring, asking us a question. And then nobody said anything. Then he walked out. As he went out, then he turned and there was a few of us, secretaries and assistants, Then he said, because I asked as a question, it was not an offense. When he was kind, he was talking to someone, his brother, god brother, or something, of his own spiritual master. But he was put in a situation where Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his point of view, was being offended. And therefore, he thought he had a right, he said, I expressed he had a right to question it, and by questioning it, it wasn't an offense. If he had accused, like, you're a nonsense, you didn't get, you whatever, something like that would have been offensive. But it's because he questioned, isn't it offensive? Isn't it offensive? Isn't it sinful? So that was an interesting understanding about how somebody can inquire, even if it's very intensively, but it's not technically an offense.
Hare Krishna. The understanding of a perfect gentleman and how to behave, even
How not to create an enemy.
yeah.
Don't accuse, but pose things as a question.
But I'm bringing it out, just stating the facts. No, that's a wonderful example of the expertise. I mean, as you said, this quality of not giving anyone cause to make you their enemy is another element here. So this has been very, very instructive and enlightening, and also very relishable to hear about Srila Prabhupada's qualities.
Right.
Thank you.
So these are things that we can imbibe in ourselves, and then to further realize that lesson, for those that are listening, repeat these stories to your friends, family, god brothers, god sisters. It will stick in your heart even further, and they will have the opportunity to understand Prabhupada's position and his qualities, and hopefully be able to imbibe those qualities in ourselves.
Not just theoretically, but practically too. I mean, all of these examples that you've seen, we've been looking at, are practical examples of how to behave with this quality.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thank you for inviting me and being able to share these memories. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks, okay. And thank you. By the way, before we leave, please, in addition to our own gbcspt.com website, there is prabhupadmemories.com. And make sure everyone go to the website, subscribe. You can, get the latest as they continue to come out. I know that this is an ongoing project. This is not it's not over. There's still a number of us still around. First of all, in the thousands, we're still alive, and not everyone has had a chance to share their memories. And I think when we're all gone, this will still continue, because we'll find that people who are the grand disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they're going to have their memories too.
Right. Anyway, thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you, Siddhanta Prabhu.
See you in a couple of weeks.
And, Hare Krishna.
For lesson, our quality number 3 coming up.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Sorry.